Many clients over the years have asked me whether it's a disadvantage or an advantage to be from a certain nationality when you're going through the US immigration system. And I can understand why people are asking. Sometimes they're concerned that based on the country that they're from, they may face additional hurdles or be treated differently inside of the US immigration system. And it's a great question. I can see why people are asking about that. In theory, the answer is that the US immigration laws are not nationality specific, that they apply to immigrants from all countries in the world equally. However, in practice, there are a few features of the US immigration laws that tend to, in reality, sort of impact people from different areas slightly differently, which is what gives that perception sometimes of different nationalities having an advantage or a disadvantage in the immigration laws. So today I'm going to go through what are those specific features of the laws and how it may or may not impact you based on your nationality. So probably the number one thing that people are thinking when they're asking about the difference between the nationalities has to do with the fact that there are annual visa caps in certain categories in the US immigration law system. So for some family-based petition categories, for some employment or skills-based categories, Congress has set a total limit, the total number of people that can receive green cards through that category in any government fiscal year. The fiscal year for the government starts on October 1st of each year. But so for that year, just to give you an example, if you're in the category of a sibling of a US citizen, only 65,000 people are allowed to enter the US each year using that category. So what happens is each year, more people than that worldwide do actually apply to come in based on their sibling relationship. And then each year, the waiting list of people waiting for a visa gets a little bit longer as they're waiting until the next fiscal year for more visas to be available in the next fiscal year. So that applies the same to people throughout the world. However, there's also a small detail in there where each foreign nation is actually limited to no more than 7% of that total number. So, if there are 65,000 visas available worldwide for siblings, only 7% can be given to a certain country. So that, and the idea behind that being that we wouldn't, that we would have sort of diverse immigration from all over the world and give different places a chance. However, when you look at how that plays out, some countries are a lot bigger in terms of population than other countries, and some foreign countries have a lot more interest in immigrating to the United States. So what happens is, although theoretically there's a certain amount worldwide for everyone for that year, and it's, first in, first visa, sort of, you're standing in line in order. What happens is if you're from Mexico, if you're from India, if you're from China, or you're from the Philippines, those are all countries that have high populations and also have high rates of immigration to the United States. So we see that the wait time for those countries for the visas is even longer than just the general waiting list, simply because each year they use up their 7% before the total amount for the year is allotted. So if I were in charge of the world, I would make that rule differently because I really don't like that. And obviously for a lot of my clients of certain countries, they have to wait longer, and it's just not fair. But that does give a lot of perception of why are they making people from certain countries wait longer than for other countries. And technically they're doing it to try to be fair, but we could argue about whether that's fair or not. Anyway, that's one of the main ways that the perception of sort of different treatment between nationalities comes about, is through the visa cap allotments. But it's not the only reason. The next major reason that I see people having different experiences through the immigration system has to do with certain geopolitical issues or even cultural tendencies based on the country where you're from. So if you happen to be, for example, from a country which unfortunately is having sort of, political strife or, conflict, or people are, fleeing from your region and maybe seeking asylum in the United States versus some other type of immigration benefit, then you may perceive that the experience in immigrating to the United States is different simply because of the route you're taking into the United States. So to give you an example, in the last few years in the US, the country seeking the highest number of US asylum claims has been Venezuela, simply because it's a big country and because it's had a lot of political issues. And so a lot of Venezuelans are coming to the United States and seeking asylum here. And the US asylum system is really, it's kind of backed up. It's only equipped to handle a certain number of cases. And so over the last few years, especially, we've seen just really big backlogs in asylum case processing. So a lot of the Venezuelan nationals who've come into the US specifically have had a wait time of many, many years even to be interviewed. But that's not because they're Venezuelan, it's because they're applying for asylum. If they had, for example, been coming from a different country that is having, that's very stable right now, maybe they would have a higher rate, or it would be more typical from people from that other country to perhaps come over based on being transferred for their job from one, branch of an international corporation into the U.S. or something like that, that doesn't have the wait times or the backlogs that we see in the asylum system. So again, it's not because of the nationality, but it's just simply because of the route they're taking into the United States. As immigration lawyers, we're always looking, for the client's individual fact pattern or their individual circumstances. We're always going to look for what would be the easiest and the most favorable way for you to come into the U.S., using all of the different routes and not necessarily feeling limited to one in particular, because some of them are a lot easier to use than others. Another slightly less known, but definitely important difference between certain nationalities is that in some circumstances, the US actually has special treaties or special types of agreements with some foreign nations that they don't have with other foreign nations. So an example would be NAFTA, which is an agreement between, with the North American countries of the US, Mexico, and Canada, that actually gives certain Mexican nationals and certain Canadian nationals visa options like the TN that just don't exist for other countries. We see the same thing with Chile and Singapore with the H-1B1 specifically. So these are specific, kind of very detailed, like very specific agreements about a very particular thing that the US, for whatever reason, has made an agreement about. Sometimes the agreements were not really even intended to be immigration laws or immigration agreements, but it just sort of like through the negotiation between the nations that got thrown into the pot. And we can use that to the advantage of only those nationals. So sometimes those special treaties come into play. Another way we see specific treaties or agreements come into play a lot has to do with if your country has made an agreement specifically for you to be able to come in as a business person. There are certain types of visas, trader visas, where you can start a business in the United States, but only if your specific country has made such an agreement with the US. So those are times when you may have a special option available to you that just isn't available to people in other countries, which can cause some disparate options. And then finally, the last major way that I see different nationalities have a different US immigration experience is due to certain types of security measures or certain types of political conflict between the US and other countries. So we see this in cases where, for example, there are certain places in the Middle East currently which the US considers to sort of produce a high number of dangerous individuals, perhaps people who have ties to terrorist groups that they think could be a danger to the United States based on, the intelligence community of the US, and sort of the State Department has determined that this is a risk. So for some countries, if you're from that place, everyone gets a background security check if you're immigrating to the US. No one's going to be able to skip that step. But for some countries, just because you're from a particular country, or because maybe there aren't very good criminal records or background records available from your country, it may take longer to do your background security clearance. So that's not to say that the US would say, well, you're from that country, you're too dangerous, we're not letting you in. But they may ask for additional details. There may be additional delays with your case if you happen to be from one of those particular countries, or if you happen to sort of be in a general demographic, such as like a male from a certain place, or you've traveled to certain places that are kind of on a list, then you may face additional, just like additional scrutiny that can make it take longer. However, if you are, if your background is clear and you have not done anything wrong, usually it's just a question of giving them what they want so that you can be cleared and get through the process. So as you can see, we have a complicated immigration system. If you've learned nothing else from my channel, it's probably just that. But there are a lot of different factors that go into play in terms of how quickly you can get through the US immigration system and meet your goals. So we're always trying to work around that. But hopefully this video gave you a little bit more information about how your nationality could impact your US immigration case.